Hello and welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you are listening to episode number 25. Today I'm joined by Adam Parr of Transition Wild and Quiet Cat. We're talking Colorado elk and whitetail hunting and Adam's move from Michigan to Colorado and much, much more. So stay tuned. All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Campbell. I gotta say, I'm pretty pumped today. The weather finally broke and finally getting a little bit of spring weather here in Pennsylvania. It's been, we had a little tease earlier in the spring where we had some warm weather and then it got cold all of a sudden, and then it's just been kind of rainy ever since. So I've been kind of cooped up inside. So the windows are open today. I've got a little extra kind of pep in my step, seeing that big orange ball in the sky that I haven't seen in a while. So you just have to bear with me here if I seem a little excited today. The one bummer about all the rain, or I guess the additional bummer about all the rain, was I was really planning a turkey hunt in Ohio this year. I was really looking forward to that, to kind of do a scout and a turkey hunt. You know, scout, of course, for the upcoming deer season. And it just seems like every weekend it's just been rain all day Saturday. So my plans to head to Ohio for a turkey hunt, I think, are officially dead at this point, which is kind of unfortunate. I was really looking forward to that. This weekend, of course, or this past weekend was Mother's Day. And the following weekend, I have some things to attend to that are family related, and then I have a gathering over the course of the holiday weekend here that's coming up at the end of May. I will actually get out for one more turkey hunt over the course of that holiday weekend with my dad. I'm really looking forward to that. We haven't had a chance to hunt together in, I don't know. It's been at least 10 years since he and I have been able to actually hit the timber together, just because there's distance between, where he lives and where I live, and our schedules matching up and so forth. So I'm really looking forward to that. But with this little bit of nice weather that I'm getting, it's like and even whenever it was cold, I was still hitting the range quite a bit. And was really kind of continuing to work on extending my range and really kind of dialing it in at a distance, which has been going pretty well. I'm pretty excited about the progress I've made. It's, I'm feeling pretty good out to roughly 60 yards, preparing for that Western hunt this upcoming September. And kind of now started working on in-between distances, which are always kind of tricky. I've always felt really good at my in-between, my odd distances, whether it's, 33, 37 yards, whatever the case might be, out to roughly 40 yards. Anything over 40 yards, whenever I get to the odd distances, I'm just not as familiar with. So I started kind of pressing myself more in that regard, and kind of trying to get comfortable with those odd yardages, and understanding what's going to happen with the flight of my arrow as I step out to 58 yards or 56 yards, really trying to determine, at this point in the year, what pin I'm going to use for those distances. That way, whenever, if a shot opportunity presents itself here in the fall at that distance, I know automatically what pin I'm kind of going to. So I actually just got back from the range, was playing around with that a little bit, starting to get things figured out, but by no means is that locked in quite yet. But we'll continue to work on it, and hopefully we'll be dialed in by September, I anticipate. But speaking of elk hunting, I have a really interesting guest on today. A friend of mine, Adam Parr. Some of you may know him. He's been on a couple different podcasts in the past. He has an interesting story where he's a Midwesterner by birth, and kind of had that dream of heading west, as many of us do that are hunters and who love the outdoors. And he's just one of those cats that just kind of put it all together and made it happen. Beyond that, he has some experience now, obviously living out west, where he's kind of taking that step in chasing Western game. And so I was really kind of curious to get his perspective as a new Westerner, if you will, and what it's like kind of making that transition from the Midwest to Western style hunting, and some things that he's picked up and learned along the way as he's making that transition. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get Adam on the line. But before we do that, let's hear this week's Whitetail Institute food plot tip of the week. Today, John shares how to best blend forages to provide deer a variety of forage throughout the various seasons.
Okay, we talked about how to choose the optimum Whitetail Institute forage products, one or more, for each plot. think about variety. If you were to go into a buffet restaurant and they had hamburgers, what if you didn't want a hamburger? You wanted something else. Well, you go in a buffet type thing and you got hamburgers and steak and all this, and when you're deciding where to go, you're probably gonna go to the place that offers you more options than you would a place that just has one thing. And that's a matter of increasing perceived attraction, I guess you could put it, through variety. Whitetail Institute forage products are all blends except for one product, Chick Magnet, which is our chicory, and it was a component in our blends, and people just started asking for it separately, so we packaged it separately. But the point is that part of the method to our madness is to have blends of complementary forage types that maximize the performance of the plot across a broad range of categories for as long as possible. You can actually increase that variety, attraction through variety even more. And this is not something you have to do, but it's just something to play with. If you if you have more than one forage that's right for that site, to plant them both in there. The best way to do that is not to try to put them one on top of the other. It's better to run them side by side for several reasons. One is our forage blends are already tested to ensure that the components are in the optimum ratios that our testing shows will maximize attractiveness to deer. If you try to mix two components or two forage products, you're going to have to adjust the seed rates so you don't overplant. And it could be that you throw the ratios off, which is not always going to be a bad thing, but it's not going to really help. The second thing is you want to plant them side by side because that gives deer an even better feeling that there's more variety in the plot. And the third thing is it's fun. You can put your exclusion cages out there, which we do at every plot we do, and that's the only way to tell how hard deer are hitting the plot is with the exclusion cage. But you can compare and you can see which ones the deer prefer at what time of year, and maybe tweak your setup next year. It's a fun thing to do.
And that, folks, is a Whitetail Institute food plot tip of the week. If you'd like to learn which Whitetail Institute products might be right for you, head over to whitetailinstitute.com to check out their product selector tool to help you determine which forage will work best for your food plot needs. And now let's get back to the show. All right, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and today I am joined by Adam Parr. Adam is a gentleman I ran into at the Harrisburg Outdoor Show. Met him at the Quiet Cat booth, and we struck up a conversation and just kind of started BSing about hunting as folks do at those types of shows. And he had a little bit of an interesting story that kind of really piqued my interest. He's, I won't kind of divulge all the information. I'll let him kind of tell the story, but I think at some point in time, all of us hunters probably kind of want to gravitate toward the West at some point. And I think a lot of us kind of think it's a pipe dream, so to speak. And then some of us, or some of those, I should say, not us, because I'm not included in that group, have the stones just to kind of go for broke and make it happen. And that's the type of guy we have on the show today. So before we get this party started, Adam, how you doing, man? How are things?
Hey, Clint, doing well. I appreciate you having me on here. Yeah, everything's good. Colorado is beautiful this time of the year.
Yeah, rub it in.
Turn nice. So yeah, can't complain. That's it's great. I love it here, and it caters to my outdoor lifestyle. So I'm always outside doing something and just enjoying the great outdoors.
Nice. Yeah, I know we got to chat a little bit while we were at the outdoor show, and then we've traded a few texts and so forth. But for those who aren't familiar with you or your blog, which we'll mention here through the show, give everyone a sense of your background, where you're from, originally, where you live now, and then what you do kind of professionally in the outdoor industry.
Yeah, so I grew up in Michigan, born and raised, and grew up really hunting whitetail deer and small game and turkeys and all the above. Took my hunter safety before I could actually legally bow hunt. And then when I turned 12, I think it was 12, when you could start bow hunting for deer, I just jumped right into it full force. And, so that kind of evolved. The addiction kind of increased and started kind of branching out, started doing some out of state trips, and, just really fell in love with hunting. It was always one of those things that it was my passion. I had a lot of other hobbies, but hunting was always that kind of number one. And Michigan, as probably is very similar to Pennsylvania as far as deer hunters, and how crazy we are and how many there are in the state. And so I think that really kind of, although it's not the best for trophy hunting, let's say, but there are a lot of deer, and it's just part of our culture, right? So it kind of made me who I am in my professional career. So I moved out to Colorado in June of 2015, so coming up on two years now, and I work for a company called Quiet Cat, which is basically we make portable electric ATVs and electric fat tire mountain bikes, and we market them to hunters, fishermen, outdoorsmen as a way to access properties quickly, quietly, and scent free. So I am the head of sales for that, sales and marketing for them, and again, I work in the outdoor industry, so it's kind of a dream come true, and I truly love what I get to do every day.
That's awesome, man. So two questions for you. One, with your hunting background, as you mentioned, Michigan has a big heritage, similar to Pennsylvania and so forth. But did your family hunt typically growing up? Was it something you picked up from your dad, or was it a grandfather or uncle? Like how did you kind of get into hunting at that early age?
Yeah, a little bit of everything. My dad wasn't a serious hardcore hunter, like to my level, but he, definitely hunted growing up. But between me and my brother, he basically got us into archery and shooting guns and all that stuff. So kind of grew up with it a little bit in the family. But again, it's not like he's not on the same level. I took it to a whole different, universe, I like to say. But
right.
But yeah, no, he definitely got us into hunting. And then my uncle, we'd hunt over at his place. He had a nice tract of land near us, so we'd get to hunt there, and that kind of garnished that kind of love with deer hunting and being in the outdoors.
Nice, yeah. So, and then Quiet Cat. It's interesting what you guys do. It's like the first time I forget what it was. I think I read an article about it. And I was like, wow, it's really interesting, because I was really kind of looking at access routes at that point on our farm, because our farm that we have, that I hunt a lot of deer on here in PA. Access there is probably one of the things that I have is the biggest challenge on that property. So I was kind of looking for possible solutions, and I started listening to some guys that were, riding mountain bikes and stuff like that. And I was like, well, mountain bike sounds great. I was like, but man, I got some, for Pennsylvania, this isn't Colorado standards, but I got some pretty deep hollows that I don't know that I want to necessarily mountain bike out of in the dark in the evening.
Yeah.
And so the funny thing was I saw an ad for Quiet Cat, and then I think it was that same off season. I'm a big time Steeler fan, so I saw Ben Roethlisberger had a Quiet Cat, and he used it to get from practice field to practice field on his off day, so he would give his legs a rest. So you have another sales opportunity there. I'm just going to kind of give it to you free of charge. NFL quarterbacks that are on their last leg.
Yeah, hey, exactly. Yeah, no, Ben's a great guy. Yeah, he loves his Quiet Cat. He also has one of our new bikes now. And again, I mean, there's plenty of uses for these kind of electric vehicles and electric bikes. I mean, whether you're trying to access, public land, 3 miles in, or just trying to go check trail cameras on the back 40, really does make sense as far as, obviously you're not making any noise, you're not making any, it's very low impact on the ground. There's no scent. You're in a lot more efficiently, in and out quicker. So there's just less time to potentially bust deer. And for the guys that are, might not be able to go as far as they used to, whether they're just getting older in age, have a disability, had a surgery, a knee replacement, it still allows them to get out there and do what they love. So that's a pretty cool aspect about it.
Yeah, and not to mention, like, the part that was appealing to me was 2 was, low impact, of course, not having sound, being able to kind of, get through, because a lot of our access, unfortunately, on our farm is field related. And, you go in the mornings, you're kind of busting up the field, which doesn't allow deer to kind of filter back into their bedding areas naturally. 2 is just the sweat factor. Just like when I'm making some hikes in, it's like if I can keep my sweat down, it's obviously does wonders for me for scent control. But you have my vote of confidence, especially if it helps Ben's legs and gets us another Super Bowl. So I'll be rooting for Quiet Cat all this off season.
All right, perfect. Glad to help out.
Yeah, for sure. But so speaking of deer hunting, man, and just hunting in general, how was your 2016 season? Did you mainly hunt Colorado, or did you get a chance to get out of state at all?
Yeah, I really just stuck to Colorado. I didn't draw my Kansas tag. I've drawn that tag the last couple years, and this last year I just didn't draw it. So that kind of threw a stick into things, and I elk hunted in Colorado for archery in September. And then when it came to whitetails, I just purchased a leftover tag for whitetail on the Eastern Plains and hunted there. So I got best of both worlds, and it was a great season.
Nice. And I know I think if I'm not mistaken, you have a plan to go to Iowa here in the works for 2017, right?
Yeah, that's on the books as long as we draw the tag. Have 3 points we may or may not draw. Me and my buddy and I have been putting in for the last 3 years, and we're going to try to draw the tag. Not really sure what our odds are. I'm guessing somewhere around 50%, but I put in for Kansas as well, so I'll be able to. The nice thing about Kansas is it's only 5 hours. Where I actually hunt from where I live, it's about 5 hours. So that's pretty manageable for weekends or long weekends, or, just busting out there for a couple days and coming back. So I have that. Since I didn't draw last year, I did receive a preference point, so I should draw it this year. So that's on the books. Iowa's up in the air, and maybe depending on if I get the Iowa tag or not, maybe I'll hunt on the Eastern Plains of Colorado if everything goes well in Kansas.
Nice. Yes. I think I have I've got 2 more years before I think I would have a legitimate chance to draw one of the good zones in Iowa. And that actually I think just opened right this past week. I think the putting in for your tags and buying your preference points just opened up the beginning of May, if I'm not mistaken, for Iowa.
Yep.
Nice.
I think you have another few weeks till beginning of June, I believe.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'm looking forward. So have you hunted Iowa before, or would this be your first Iowa trip?
I have not hunted Iowa. My buddy Joey and I just recently took a trip out there, and end of March we went out and did a little bit of scouting. We were able to kind of digital scout from above prior to that, kind of figured out some areas where we wanted to go, but we went out there and were able to walk around and learn some of the areas, learn a lot of areas we didn't want to hunt, and learn some good access routes and potential spots to go to. So other than that, that's really all the experience I have in Iowa.
Nice. Yeah, I'm looking forward to one day making a trip. I'm on the fence, man, because it's like I know, roughly it's an every 4-year draw for the prime zones, but I've also kicked around the idea of drawing one of the, what I'll call the lesser zones, if you will, because I could probably draw, or whomever puts in, and has preference points could probably draw every 2 years. And for a guy from Pennsylvania, I kind of look at it like, even if I'm drawing in one of the lesser desired zones in Iowa, I'm still going to run into caliber deer that I've never seen before in the Pennsylvania woods. So I'm kind of like, do I make trips more often, or do I kind of hold out and go to one of the better zones? What do you think?
You're exactly right. I mean, coming from Michigan, you from Pennsylvania, I mean, pretty much once you leave the state lines and head west, you're getting into better deer hunting.
Right.
And the way I look at it too is, yeah, you're in Iowa. I mean, everyone talks about Iowa's, the land of the giants, and to a certain extent it is, but it's still going to be challenging. Mm-hmm. But I mean, the deer there, the age class, the buck to doe ratio is just going to be much better than what me and you are used to hunting pressured states such as Michigan and Pennsylvania. So, I mean, it's completely up in the air. I think you can find good deer anywhere you go to, and plenty of good public as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I went to Ohio this year. That was my first trip to Ohio. And
nice.
that was the hunting, from PA to just Ohio, like one state over, was just insane. Like I could have never imagined.
Different world. Yeah, I hunted Ohio as well, and same thing. I mean, yeah, it's a bordering state, but as soon as you cross the state line, it's a completely different animal. And I really enjoyed hunting Ohio as well. It was bigger woods hunting than what I grew up. Southern Michigan, where I was at, is a lot of crop fields, but still a good amount of timber mixed in. But those rolling hills and just miles of timber it's challenging to hunt, but there's definitely good deer down there.
Yeah, for sure. That's kind of where I got into, was that kind of bigger timber setting. I tried to, I stayed away from anything that even kind of resembled agriculture for obvious reasons, is wanting to get away from where people were going to likely kind of gather and easier access to get into. But so, as I mentioned, you and I had met at the outdoor show, and I've been following you on social media, since then, basically. And, we've shared a few texts, of course, and I know you've been doing a lot of scouting lately, and I'm going to be completely honest. Some of the pictures that you share make me absolutely jealous of, like, the views that you get to see in the terrain you get to kind of hike through and stuff like that. But with that being said, have you had any good finds, like, whether it would be, some good bone find, or like any new public land that you've kind of stumbled onto that you really found that you thought was really attractive to you for this upcoming elk season?
Yeah, a little bit of both. I've definitely been pounding the miles here over the last month or so, really. I mean, mule deer, I've picked up probably, 10 or so mule deer sheds. Nothing crazy, but I found a few pretty nice match sets. As far as elk, I've found 5-6 antlers so far. It's pretty crazy. I've lived out here a couple years. I've actually shed hunted in Colorado for the past 3 years. This is my third season, and I have yet to find a fresh elk shed.
Really?
I don't know I'm like cursed. I don't know what the deal is, but I find elk sheds, but I can't seem to find a fresh one. They're always a year or two or 4 or 5 years old, and they're all chalked out. But
right.
Hey, they're still fun to find, and I really do enjoy shed hunting. I was a huge shed hunter back in Michigan. I'd get out of school or class in high school, and I just, in the spring, I just bomb right out to properties to go walking. And it's the same thing here, except it's a little tougher because you really, out here, especially for elk sheds, you really can't just say, I'm going to go out for an hour or 2 hours. It's more like it's going to take you an hour or two just to get to where you're going to start finding sheds. And then, then you are going to be, in the zone where they're going to be. So it's a little bit challenging in that respect, but yeah, I've been able to find some antlers. It's been a lot of fun. In accordance to that, I've kind of been able to scout some areas. I'm not really where you hunt elk and where you find elk sheds are kind of in opposite locations, so to speak. So what I'm doing now is not really pertaining to what I'll be hunting this coming fall. That being said, I'm starting to find some areas where they do start to overlap, or they're in kind of close proximity that you can kind of hike through on the way out or way in, So as far as right now, it's really just shed hunting, but that'll transition here pretty soon to setting up cameras and actually scouting for upcoming hunting season.
Nice. Yeah, I shed hunt just about every year for the past couple of years, and I have yet to find one. I always say I'm possibly.
You gotta come to Colorado, man. We'll get you hooked up.
Cool. Hey, man, I will take you up on that offer for sure. Colorado is like probably one of my favorite states. It's, truth be told, my wife and I, when we moved back to Pennsylvania, we were coming back from Florida, and I had a job opportunity in Colorado. However, my wife and daughter were in Pennsylvania because we were considering moving to PA, and I was still in Florida. So we were trying to figure out where we were going to move to, and it was just, I had a job opportunity in Colorado, and I had one here near Philadelphia. And it was one of those things where if I took the one in Colorado, going to be a while, probably like another 6 months before I could get my family out there. So I wasn't going to see them very often. And we were already kind of apart for 6 months at that point. And our daughter was only, she was, I think maybe 2 at the time. And, or I could take the job in Philadelphia and I could drive home every weekend and see them. And so the heartstrings won out, and we took the gig in Philadelphia. That way I could be closer to them. But there's definitely some days where I kind of kick myself, because Colorado was definitely calling. It was always the place that we looked at too and like circled on the map. We were like, this is where we're moving, and it just we didn't take it. But I'm a terrible shed hunter. That's the moral of the story there. And if a job opportunity comes along in Colorado, don't do what I did and just take it.
Yeah, man, it's tough. Family, I can't speak to where you're at. I'm single. I don't have a wife. I don't have any kids. So when I did move out, I did have a girlfriend at the time. But really, it was a pretty easy move. But yeah, leaving family and what for your whole life and moving somewhere is quite difficult. So it's not something that everybody can do. But don't count yourself out, man. You might be out here in couple years, who knows? You never say never, right?
That's right, man. It's like I'm still leaving it on the table. We still kick it around once in a while. It's it's still in the plans. Let's say it's not been vetoed completely. But so speaking of your transition out there, it's a perfect segue. It's almost like we planned this. Your blog, Transition Wild, is interesting as you're kind of detailing your story as someone who's gone from a Midwesterner to a person who's moved to Colorado. And as I'd mentioned at the top, I think anyone who really, has a passion for the outdoors, likes being outside, enjoys hunting, sees the West as this Mecca kind of, right? It's like you have the music scene, and it's like the Mecca is always kind of LA and New York. It's like when you're talking hunting, the Mecca is really heading to those Western states. And so I'm just curious, what was the deciding factor for you to make that move? Because as you said, it's like leaving what you know and what you're comfortable and familiar with is a challenge. So was this something you always wanted to do, or was this spur of the moment? So how did this kind of come about?
Yeah, it was kind of, I'd say my situation is pretty similar to yours. It was, so probably, can't remember what year it was, but my buddy's dad, he has a place out here, and we would take some vacations out here. And I took some work trips out here after I graduated from college, and other vacations. I have family out here too, so I was always familiar with it. And every time I moved or went out here for either vacation or some sort of trip, it was one of those things that you'd never wanted to leave. It was like, I love the mountains. I love how much public land there is. It's an active outdoor, state. And it's just kind of what I always dreamed of. And I always told myself, if I ever moved from Michigan, the only state I could ever see myself moving to was Colorado. So, I graduated college. I went to work for a solar company there, and it was great. But there was always this thing in the back of my mind, like, it would be nice to move there. And it was one of those things where it's kind of that far-fetched dream, right? You never think you're going to do it. But one day, my girlfriend at the time, she was just kind of like, well, let's move to Colorado, just pretty much out of the blue. And I was like, are you serious? You want to move there? So we kind of talked it over, and I was like, yeah, I'm down. Let's go. And it wasn't something that we just kind of spur of the moment, like just upped and moved. It was a process, right? So,
right, yeah.
So kind of made the decision. That would have been like, let's see, like late 2014, early 2015, let's say around Christmas time, 2014, January 2015. So kind of put the steps in place, sold the house, quit my job, and started kind of interviewing and doing the whole flying thing back and forth, interviewing with companies and just kind of all worked out. So 6 months after that, we had moved out in June of 2015 and kind of started that whole journey. So it was one of those things that I always thought I could see myself living there, but never really thought it would happen. And then it just kind of took something to kind of, put you over the edge and actually do it. And then again, be smart about it. So you put put the process and the steps in place so you actually have a job when you get out there, and everything's all kind of kosher by the time you make that move.
Right. Yeah, that's you did a lot more planning than me. When my wife and I moved to Florida, we were dating at the time. I called her one day and said she was getting ready to graduate from college, and I was a musician type of guy, I guess you would say. And,
nice.
Yeah, and I called her one day. She was graduating in a week, and I called her and I said, "Hey, I'm going to come to your graduation next week and everything on Saturday or whatever." I was like, but after that, I was like, I'm going to move to Orlando, and if you want to go, that's cool. But if not, I'm going to go. And she was like, she's like, "Yeah, I'm going." And I was like, "All right." So she literally went down or maybe it was 2 weeks before her graduation, but she literally went down the week before and got an interview and ended up getting a gig. And then we drove down, she graduated on Saturday, and we drove down Sunday morning and went and moved to Orlando. It was a 2-week process. It was "Hey, we're going. Let's do it."
That's impressive.
Yeah, it was. I was a lot younger and marginally dumber, we'll say, because I don't know that necessarily always completely wears off with age, but I hope that some of it did at least. So I know that the allure of the West, as I had mentioned, is the outdoors, and of course the great hunting that exists out there. And I think a lot of people kind of attribute it to whether it's elk or chasing mule deer or whatever the case is. But I know you mentioned earlier that you were doing some whitetail hunting. How is the whitetail hunting in Colorado? Is it pretty good? Give me a comparison to what you've experienced in some other states, I guess.
Yeah, the deer hunting is pretty good. It's not one of those states that, when it comes to whitetails, you don't really think of eastern Colorado, right? It's kind of on the back burner. We all think Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, those kind of states. But there's definitely deer on eastern plains of Colorado, and even kind of up into the foothills, at the base of the mountains, heading up into to elk country. But I was hunting on the eastern plains. It's a completely different environment than, what you and I grew up in. It's very flat. It is very open, so not a whole lot of trees. Pretty much the property I was hunting, private land, I kind of went out and started knocking on doors, not in the summer. I kind of just showed up in the fall and kind of had to scramble to find some land, but got access to a few properties, but again, very, very flat. And the particular one property I was hunting is really just 2 giant sections, 640 acres each. So there's 2 of them. The one really was the one I was focusing on, and it was just CRP grass, the entire thing. It wasn't really a tree on the place. So that's can be very intimidating for especially a guy who's used to trees and big timber to go out there and do that. But I've kind of slowly kind of worked up to that through Kansas. Kansas, I feel, is kind of the perfect liaison, I guess, between Midwest and hunting more of the western whitetail states, because you do have some trees, you do have some river bottom. It's kind of a mix of both stationary, stand or blind hunting versus spot and stalk, right? So eastern Colorado is pretty much, you can sit stationary, but it's pretty tough because there's really no travel corridors or pinch points or funnels. It's just literally you see them and then go after one. So it's a lot of fun, though. I mean, it's completely different, and I had a blast hunting out there this year.
So that's the one thing that I think is interesting about the West. I'm making my first Western trip this year. To the Western, I guess, lower 48. I've hunted Alaska in the past, but I've never hunted, anything as far as whitetail, west of Ohio. And I'll make my first elk trip this year to Montana in September, which I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah.
And it's a much more active hunt in the West. You know what I mean? At least from, I have some friends who live out West as well. And that's kind of what I get. It's like everything is an active kind of moving spot and stalk, on your feet, hunt versus kind of standing and waiting. Right.
Yeah. It really is. I prefer Kansas over Eastern Colorado. One, because the deer are better, at least what I've experienced, the deer are better, bigger deer, better age structure. But the thing I like about hunting the West and what I've really grown to like is you have, like you said, a more interactive hunt. If you want to go hunt in a stand or set up a ground blind or sit stationary, you can. But if you want to, have more of a mobile hunt and cover some ground, you can do that as well. And whether you're hunting public or private, these tracts of land are, much larger. I mean, I was hunting pieces that were a couple thousand acres in size, private, and public as well. But you just don't, where we grew up, at least in southern Michigan, and where you grew up in Pennsylvania, you probably just don't get to experience large tracts of land like that. So the thing is, in those higher pressure states, you're worried about, bumping deer, or you're worried about, screwing things up and pushing them over to your neighbors. Whereas out here, you have so much land to play with, you can afford to take some risks. So if you see a buck bed down in a little spot or a little fence row and you want to go after them, you can, and you don't got to worry about, blowing things out of the whole property, and if that doesn't work out, you move on to the next one. So it's a really cool dynamic. I've really grown to love it because you do have so many options.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. You're right. Because, here and I'm sure in southern Michigan, it's, depending on how much ground you have, but, most people have, if they're lucky, maybe they have 100, 200 acres. And a lot of people are hunting on a lot smaller parcels than that around here. And if you make that one mistake on that one deer that you have on your property that you're that's the guy for the year, you make one mistake, it could be, sayonara. Your hunting season's kind of over at that point, at least for that property. You usually have to have multiple around here to hunt, just because, especially if you're going to play the wind and so forth, that a property might be small enough to where you really only have a wind that you can hunt it. So exactly. If you don't have that wind, you're kind of out of luck for that property. So speaking of, hunting whitetail and muleys and elk, how difficult from a non-resident perspective is it to get a tag for Colorado? Are there over-the-counter opportunities, or is it a tough state to draw in?
So deer, whether it's whitetail or mule deer, is all over the counter. Actually, I take that back. There is a late season whitetail. Really in Colorado, there's kind of that. There's this buffer zone, right? It's called the foothills in between the eastern plains and where you actually get into the mountains. So there are some over-counter whitetail tags there because for some reason or another they don't want them. I don't believe how they want the state managed. They want to kind of keep that buffer there, so they want the whitetails out of that area. Mm-hmm. So there are some over-the-counter opportunities there. I think it's like December through to January 1st. I've looked into it. I just haven't hunted it. It's one of those things where there's probably not that many whitetails in that area. So it's a tough hunt, more private land. As far as mule deer, again, everything's a draw. With both mule deer and whitetail, there are usually, depending on the unit, I mean, there's leftover tags. So the tags that don't get purchased or drawn, they basically early August, the Department of Wildlife releases that list, and then you can go in there and see, what tags are available for certain units and certain, methods of take, whether it's archery or rifle or muzzleloader. So you can always like I bought my whitetail tag as a leftover. I didn't put in for that draw. So and then as far as elk, there are plenty of over-the-counter opportunities for bulls. Archery, there are, I think in total, there are 130 some units that are over-the-counter, either sex archery tags for elk. Granted, there's only 78 or so, 70 or 80 that are west of I-25, which is, where you want to be. So there's definitely over-the-counter archery opportunities. There's over-the-counter rifle for bull as well, second and third season rifle. But as far as like cow tags, there's some over-the-counter archery, just cow only. The rifle with cows, I believe, are all draw, other than some private land opportunities. Colorado's pretty confusing at the end of the day, and I'm still trying to learn the whole system.
Right.
But that's kind of the gist of it. There's definitely opportunities. Colorado's probably the most hunted elk state in the country. I mean, there's, with the amount of over-the-counter tags there are available and the sheer number of elk in the state, it's really the kind of destination state for a lot of first-time elk hunters because of, all of that.
Right. Yeah, my dad actually took a bull in Colorado. I want to say it was maybe 4 years ago. I know he plans to come back. Are you doing a fair amount of mule deer hunting? Or are you concentrating mainly on elk? Like, what's your breakout for your hunting season usually look like?
Yeah, I haven't mule deer hunted yet. I want to archery hunt, and those tags seem to be a little bit easier to draw. I'm kind of holding out for a little bit better unit, that's going to take 2 or 3 years to draw. So I haven't hunted muleys. It's definitely on the list next year. I'm going to try to draw a tag. I just have to decide where I want to hunt, because honestly, where I was hunting out I always thought I wanted to kill one in the mountains, right? Like kind of do that high country mule deer hunt. But after hunting the eastern plains of Colorado and seeing some of the giants out there, I don't know which way I'm going to go yet. If I can get access to some land out on the eastern plains, I could find myself hunting out there for muleys, because there are some absolute giants out there as well.
Nice. So even as a resident, you have to draw for a mule deer tag?
Yeah. Everything's draw.
Interesting. So now that we've kind of covered whitetails and so forth, I want to talk a little elk hunting. As I had mentioned earlier, I'm going to be taking my first elk trip this year on a Montana trip for 2 weeks, doing a public land DIY hunt with a buddy of ours who lives out in Montana, which is great because he actually works for the forestry industry and knows he's got some pretty prime public land spots kind of locked down that he's been hunting for a while. He took a nice bull last year too, so nice. I'm looking forward to that. But I wanted to get a sense of kind of how you prepare for elk season, and I wanted to kind of start with your off season and the types of things you're doing, now in terms of scouting. Because I know you mentioned earlier that you kind of you're shed hunting and you found some sheds, and that at times while you're shed hunting, you'll get to a point to maybe where the area that you're finding sheds in overlaps with areas that you might think about hunting. But I wanted to kind of talk about more specifically like how you're scouting for the upcoming elk season. So, what type of land are you scouting? Is it public? Is it private? And let's, I guess, give us a sense of the type of pressure that you encounter in either of those land scenarios.
Yeah, so elk hunting is all public land, over-the-counter tags. So really kind of what I'm focusing on right now as far as scouting is really Google Earth at this point. And what I'm trying to do is locate potential spots. And because I live here, have the luxury of kind of picking a spot on a map, and then I can go there and say yay or nay, right? And a lot of people don't have that, especially, you coming from, the eastern part of the country and doing an elk hunt. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to go check out that spot in real life.
Right.
So that's kind of the luxury I have, which is nice. So really I am, again, looking at Google Earth. It's such a valuable tool. And Colorado is pretty neat. I wrote an article on my blog recently about it, but basically you can go to the Colorado Department of Wildlife and download these KMZ files for Google Earth that show ranges for any type of species you want to hunt.
Oh, wow.
So it's pretty cool. So you can go there, download those if you want to learn where their winter ranges are. They've kind of got that area outlined. If you want to learn where their summer patterns are, they've got that outlined. If you want to learn where their rutting, is, it's all these features that you can overlay on Google Earth. So as far as kind of finding an initial spot, I like to reference off of those, and again, they're not going to be exactly right, you know, as far as like being right on the money, but you're going to get in the general area, and it's going to be up to you when it comes to scouting or actually the hunt itself to kind of make a move and locate those animals. So that's a really valuable resource. If you might want to check and see if Montana has anything like that, but it sounds like you have a pretty good hookup with a buddy who knows the area. So as far as specifics, what I look for, what I've learned over this past season of elk hunting, I found that all my encounters were, at least for early archery season in Colorado, the elevation was anywhere from 9,500 to 10,500. So kind of in that window. And a lot of that terrain was where the dark timber, so the pines and the spruces, are meeting the aspens. So it's kind of like, you know, that transition zone for whitetails, right? So for elk, the bedding area is going to be all your dark timber, north facing. You know, it's cooler, it's shaded, and that's where they bed at, right? And then you'll find they kind of transition maybe through the aspens. There's a little bit more light coming in. There's more food in there, and then they like to feed out into meadows if you can find some of those areas. So again, that kind of magic elevation I was finding, 9.5 to 10.5, was really where we were having all of our encounters last year throughout the entire archery season. So from there, I kind of look at, what type of land formations or terrain that elk like. And anytime that you can find a flat bench, it seems like that's where you'll find a lot of sign, a lot of rutting activity, just elk travel in general. They love those flat benches. So if you can locate some of those.
So similar to whitetail, they're like what I'm kind of hearing you say is like, so you have an elevation kind of thing in play, right? Which obviously is a little different than whitetail, right? Because you're not dealing with that much elevation. But I mean, if you think about it though, when you're thinking about whitetail, it's, you're just talking about on a larger scale for elk, right? Because deer, a mature buck is going to want to use that top third of a ridge is how he's going to want to travel for a bunch of different reasons. He wants to play the thermal. He also wants to not, silhouette himself, against or he doesn't want to skyline himself. And uses that top third. It sounds like, from layman's terms, it sounds like that 9.5 to 10.5 for you is kind of like that top third, maybe, of where they're traveling. And there also seems like they're using edge as well, whether it's edge, to travel or to get into the certain area where it's going to be cooler to bed or into a more open area that's getting more sunlight to feed. So it sounds like they act similarly, however, in different terrain. Is that kind of like somewhat fair assessment?
Yeah, definitely, for sure. I mean, we were hunting above that as well. I mean, there was a day or two that we went up to tree line, which in Colorado is about 11.5, somewhere in there, and there was definitely sign up there, and we found elk, signs of elk. We actually never saw an elk in those areas we were hunting. Don't know what it was. I mean, it absolutely smelled like a barnyard. Tracks everywhere, rubs, everything that you would expect, but we just could not locate them there. But I mean, you're exactly right. In a lot of ways, elk can be very similar to whitetail, just kind of reading terrain a little bit and on a larger scale, like you said.
Right. So what type of signs? So you ran into some signs. So what type of sign are you specifically looking for? And what do you, at least in your experience, find as the most helpful sign, or something that when you see, you're like, okay, this is what I was looking for?
With elk, it's pretty tough. I mean, the hardest part about an elk hunt, what I found, is just locating them. And a lot of guys will say the same thing. So even though you do find sign, you find rubs, you find tracks, it smells like a barnyard. You can actually smell the elk. I mean, they just have this pungent kind of cattle-like odor. And a lot of times last year, I was just like, man, I feel like we're going to bump something any second or see something any second. And in a lot of cases, it just wasn't the case. So it can be very deceiving, even though, and that's the tough part about it. Again, it's just locating them. So even though you see all these rubs, you see all these tracks, you get up somewhere and you try to glass for a ways and try to find something. We found wallows. It also depends on the time of year you're hunting too.
Right.
So trying to hunt opening weekend, they're going to be maybe more in their summer patterns and hitting some of those water holes in the evening, wallows, stuff like that. And then, when you move more towards the rut later in September, it can be kind of a free for all, just like in whitetails. They're not exactly in their bed to feed patterns, and they're going to be running around all over the place. So again, it's elk. I found where once you find them, they're easier to kill and easier to get on because they're just not as like spooky. They're not as alert. They're a little bit bigger animal and they're just different and a little bit easier to get away with on movements, just in my experience.
Right.
So that makes it difficult. Just you look, and so I would say if you're in an area for a day or two and you're not finding sign, move on and try something else, because you could sit there the entire week and you just miss that herd or just miss some elk moving through, and now they're a couple ranges over. So it's tough. It really is.
Yeah, and you're definitely putting on the miles during that period of tracking them down and trying to keep up with them or cut them off or whatever the case is. But
yeah,
so I know you're hunting, obviously, especially when you're hunting public land out west, you're hunting vast, landscapes of, thousands of acres in most cases. And even when you're on private, like you were talking about earlier on I think it was a whitetail hunt you were talking about, you were still hunting between the two parcels. You were hunting over close to 1,300-ish acres. So for me, I guess the question is are you using game cams at all to kind of help you compile intel, or is it kind of a futile effort whenever you're talking about that much land? Before we hear how Adam's using game cameras, I want to take a quick second to pause to talk about our partners at Exodus Outdoor Gear. This week's Exodus experience is from me, yours truly. I've been using Exodus trail cameras since this past early fall, and have to say without a doubt, these have been the best cameras that I've ever put into the timber. Two things that I really look for in a camera whenever I'm making a camera choice is picture quality and battery life. Number one, who wants grainy pictures, right? You want to be able to see what you're tracking and kind of get a good look at the bucks that you want to potentially pinpoint for the upcoming year. And also battery life. I live a few hours away from the property that I typically am hunting back home on our family farm, and can't afford for my cameras to eat a ton of batteries every few weeks. I just don't have the time to get back there to change out batteries often enough. So I really need the batteries that I put in there to have a long shelf life, if you will, to ensure whenever I do make my camera card pulls that they are not blank or that I don't get gaps in data due to dead batteries. The Exodus Lift camera has performed above the line in both of these categories for me. I'm still on the original set of batteries from October that I placed in the camera, and I still have 50% battery left in my most recent pull. This particular camera is on a food plot, so I'm getting a high picture rate, so that kind of speaks to the quality of the camera in terms of how it's able to kind of manage its battery intake, and the quality of the battery life, of course, is not to be outdone by their 5-year warranty and their 5-year theft policy, which is absolutely unmatched in the industry. And if that's not enough, they've upped the ante this year and taken their game camera game, no pun intended, to the next level with the upcoming release of the new Exodus Lift Mark II camera. So I would say if you're looking for a new camera, I highly suggest you head to ExodusOutdoorGear.com and check out their cameras and pre-order the new Lift 2 camera. The guys at Exodus also are hooking up all the Truth from the Stand deer hunting podcast listeners with a 10% discount on all camera purchases when you use the promo code TRUTH at checkout. With that said, let's get back to the show and hear how Adam is using his cameras for elk hunting.
Yeah, I definitely use cameras. I'll use them for both elk and whitetail, but I really don't try to pattern any specific deer off of those cameras. Really what I'm trying to do is just get an inventory of what's potentially in the area, and then from there I'm just going to adjust on the fly. Because again, there's really, at least for where I'm hunting in whitetails, there's not a whole lot of funnels and pinch points. So I'm just going to if I know there's deer in the area and I know there's going to be some good bucks utilizing this property, I just need to be in the game and make my adjustments from there. Kind of same thing with elk. I mean, again, they're herd animals. They're going to move. They could be in completely different locations from one day to the next. So again, it's just learning about what's in the area and getting out there and playing the cards that are dealt when you're actually hunting.
Right. So another question I kind of have, and I'm just curious about the elk stuff, because since I'm headed out there, it's like I'm kind of I'm kind of getting some intel from you, so I can try to hopefully
soak it all in, right?
That's right, man. I'm literally taking notes while you're talking, because I'm like, all right, man, remember this. I'm not sure if even whenever you hunt whitetail, because I mean, some people buy into it, some people don't, but that's the moon phase. And I'm just curious, number one, is that something you've ever really bought into? And two, if you do, have you seen it play out in any kind of scenario that, one moon is better than another when it comes to elk hunting?
Yeah, I can't honestly say I'm too familiar with moon phases when it comes to elk hunting. Deer, I'm definitely more familiar with it, but elk, really, I've only been hunting elk for 1 year, so I'm by no means an expert. But as far as what I know, I mean, if there is a moon, you're gonna find that there's gonna be some more activity taking place at night, potentially, right, if it's a full moon and no cloud cover. With that being said, I've also read that elk kind of are on a certain pattern, much like deer. So if they're out rutting or feeding at night, they'll feed every 5-6 hours or so, or move every 5-6 hours. So you might catch them more middle of the day, something along those lines. But I really don't buy it. I'm not going to base necessarily a hunt around the moon, or say, oh, it's a full moon right in the middle of my hunt, it's going to be a terrible week. I think it's one of those things where you just have to adjust and maybe change up your timing a little bit. And again, it's not like they're going to disappear. You might have to cover some more miles, get a little bit creative, but it's not something I pay a whole lot of attention to.
Right. Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. For whitetail 1 year, when I finally kind of started investigating the moon a little bit, what I guess you would refer to as red moons. I had a red moon in the evening. I went out and did a hunt, and I saw a couple bucks on public land that I had just minimally scouted from aerials, and then did like a speed scout one afternoon. And I was like, oh wow, the moon kind of played out. So I paid a little bit of attention as I went forward, and I personally didn't see things starting to line up. Now, that just might have been me not being observant enough, which is absolutely 100% possible. I'm not going to say that it's I was 100% paying attention the way I should. But I'm kind of in the same boat, to where it's I'd be lying if I'd say I don't look at it from time to time and see, especially if I just have like a weekend that I'm going to take off from work, or not from work, but if I have a weekend that I'm going to travel back home to hunt, it's like I'll kind of look at 2 weekends and be like, all right, which weekend do I want to go? Okay, the weather's looking better this weekend, and I have a moon. Okay, that's the weekend I'm going to go. If it kind of says, if both things are lining up for me. If they're not both lining up for me, I'm going on the better weather weekend. And that's just kind of how I kind of approach it. But I was curious too, just from the perspective of, because the big difference for me, at least, my buddies who I'm going out hunting elk with, were kind of, whenever we were kind of first talking about, and they were describing it to me, and kind of, we were talking about me possibly going, was, they asked me if I like turkey hunting, and I was like, sure, like turkey hunting. And they were like, well, just imagine it's like a 900-pound turkey. It was like, because it, you call to it, it answers you. It's a similar style of hunt, is what they were kind of, I guess, trying to drive the point across to me. And it, in that regard, it's a little bit more interactive. So I was curious, do you find like any particular time of, like, I guess, let me ask it this way. Are there any type of weather conditions, or any type of conditions in general, that you find that you get better reactions to your calling than other weather conditions?
I really, and again, I'm pretty new at this game as well, so I can't say I'm an expert by any means, but definitely when it's cooler and higher pressure, kind of nicer days, I found more success. Where I hunted at last year, opening weekend, typically a lot of people don't hear of bulls screaming and bugling and rutting and doing that whole thing. But I experienced that my very first elk hunt on that opening weekend in August. And so they were very vocal. I would, if I had called, they would answer back, and it was a really cool scenario. Now, the week I killed my bull last year, we couldn't get anything to answer us, really. And as far as like kind of some locator bugles and whatnot, did some cow calling and had some success on that front. But I really can't say, at least from my experience, certain weather patterns that kind of increase or make calling better or worse in those certain scenarios.
Right. So the one thing I'm kind of curious about, because I know we talked about your background coming from Michigan, and started out as a whitetail hunter, and you're in Colorado, and you're really enjoying the elk hunting and all the things that Colorado kind of has to offer in that regard. And I wanted to just kind of get a sense of, because it's a big change, like going from the Midwest to the West, right? So I wanted to get a sense of what type of big adjustments you had to make just in your hunting style alone by moving from Michigan to Colorado.
Yeah, the two biggest adjustments I would say are physical, requirements that go into a hunt, and gear that you need, depending on the style of hunting you want to do. So the air is drier, the elevation is higher, less oxygen, and the terrain is much steeper, as we all know. So definitely physical requirements are heightened here. You need to be in pretty good shape. I'm not one of those guys that's like, oh, I'm a serious workout guy, and I do work out and I run and I try to stay active as much as possible, which is kind of why I moved out here. It's just a very outdoor, eccentric, very healthy area. Everyone's doing something, but it's different. I'm not one of those guys that says you have to be in the best shape of your life in order to kill an elk, because you don't. I'm kind of proof of that from last year. But you do need to train for it. You need to put on some miles, do some pack walks, build up your legs, build up your cardio, and just be in as good a shape as you can be before you come out and hunt. And then the other part of that is having the right gear for the type of style of hunting that you're getting into. So coming from Michigan and even hunting in Kansas, I didn't need the best boots in the world. I didn't right. In Michigan, I could walk out to my stand that was 100 yards away in my knee-high rubber boots and be perfectly fine, right? Mm-hmm. But out here, you are putting on the miles. You're walking up steep terrain. You need good ankle support. You can't have blisters on your feet, so you need a really rugged hiking boot that's built for that type of terrain. So, and then along with that, a good pack and good clothing and other things that go along with it. If you want to be more of a backpack, on the go, tent on your back, all your stuff on your back, and just set up camp every night where you're hunting, well, that's going to take a whole nother set of gear that you need, as far as tents and camping gear and jet boils and all that stuff that goes along with it. So
right, definitely, if you don't pack it in, you don't have it.
Yeah, you can't just walk back to your truck or walk back to your house if something goes wrong or you forgot something. I mean, you're two plus, some guys are 5 miles in or more on a hunt. So you really need to be prepared in that sense. Right.
And for those, listening, I'm sure most folks are kind of aware. It's like when we talk about 5 miles, it's not 5 miles across the cornfield in a hollow. We're talking about, in a lot of instances, 5 miles in some of the nastiest stuff you've ever tried to walk through.
Yeah.
When you get west.
Brutal. Yeah, and I mean, some of the areas I was hunting last year, to be honest, I'm not going to go out there and say I hiked in like 8 miles or 5 miles or anything. I mean, but a lot of the couple of days, some of the days, I mean, we'd go like two to a certain area. We'd cover, 7 to 10, certain days as far as a big loop, but to actually get to a certain spot we wanted to get to, a lot of times we were only walking about 2 miles in at the most. But like you said, it's not just your flat terrain, it's steep. And then in that north facing dark timber, there's so many blowdowns and just deadfalls and trees and rocks. You struggle to find a straight path where you're trying to go. So you're just trying to find a game trail or just the path of least resistance. But a lot of times you're just stepping over logs, and there's no easy way to get to where you want to go. And at least where I was hunting, I can't say the same thing for all of Colorado or elk hunting in general, because there's definitely different types of terrain. But
right,
you definitely need to be in good shape to go on some of these hunts.
Yeah, that's definitely one thing that I've, upped my game on. Like I work out in the mornings before I go to work. It's kind of like my thing. It's like I do it. It's what keeps me sane, and I do it to maintain just a healthy lifestyle and stuff like that. But I've definitely kind of upped the ante, and it doesn't help that the two of the guys that I'm going with, like, well, one, my buddy, lives in Montana, and he just dominated a Spartan race this past weekend. Like, so
Wow.
Yeah, so he's in pretty good shape, and so that's one of the guys I'm going with. So it's I've got to make sure that I'm on top of my game, and not to mention that I'm the oldest one in the crew, so there's also that.
Yeah. Like I said, you don't have to be in the best shape ever. You don't have to be a bodybuilder, ultra marathon runner, that type of guy to kill an elk. But again, the better shape you are in, the more enjoyable it's going to be. You're going to be able to hunt harder. You're going to be able to hunt longer. And again, you're going to have much more of an enjoyable experience by being in better shape and preparing your body and gear and legs and feet and the whole 9 yards. So definitely anything you can do to that extent, it's going to pay dividends when you're actually out hunting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of living proof of that at the moment, because I had to kind of reassess, because like you said, it's like all my gear was geared toward whitetail, right? So most of it was heavy gear. Even if I'm hunting early season, it's like I didn't need to have necessarily lightweight gear per se, because I just wear what I need to wear into the stand, and I would just put on additional clothes once I got into the stand. So it wasn't, and then I wasn't moving at that point. So if it was a little too heavy, it wouldn't be too bad. I wouldn't get too warm. But this is, as we've kind of talked about, is an active hunt. So, the issue of kind of getting overheated and you're dealing with elevation, which, provides some additional hydration challenges. So you kind of have to be smart about how you approach it to make sure, one, that you're enjoyable, having a good time. But two, it's like, people also fail to kind of realize that, especially when you get into some areas, it's, you are in the wilderness, so you're not just a hop, skip, and a jump away from someone giving you a hand or giving you help or rescuing you if that's what's required. So you kind of have to make sure that you kind of cross your T's and dot your I's before you kind of take on what I would like to call an adventure hunt.
Yeah, exactly. It's a whole different ball game altogether.
So let me ask you this: so as far as like one of the other things I'm kind of working on too, and I'm curious to get your perspective on, is just extending my bow range. Because in the whitetail woods, it's like I'm usually, as long as I'm comfortable out to 40 yards, like I'm pretty good. Like, because I don't anticipate ever needing to take a shot further than 40 yards. The only time that would maybe be beyond that was if it was hunting a food plot edge somewhere that there was nothing between me and the deer with except air and opportunity. Would be the only time that I would maybe take the shot beyond that. But is extending your bow range something that you kind of have to think about doing whenever you start thinking about hunting the Western style hunting?
Oh yeah, I would say so for sure. And it's one of those things too. Typically, the game that you're hunting, especially for mule deer and elk, I mean, it's also a bigger target, right? So. Right. So that's definitely a difference. But yeah, I mean, I try to practice out pretty far. I mean, I'm not one of those guys who's practicing at 100, but I'm definitely reaching out there to, 70, 60 and 70. I'm consistently kind of shooting at, and, I'd feel comfortable shooting at an elk, 50, 60 yards away if I had to. As long as I'm putting groups into, a 6-inch or so kind of circle at 50, 60 yards, I'm definitely going to be in the ballpark of an elk at that range. So that's kind of the way I look at it. Every scenario is a little bit different. I've always been, I'll admit I'm not the best shot in the world, but that's really not what hunting is all about. It's more than being able to drive, hit quarters at 100. It's more about being able to read the conditions, read the animal, get in on the stalk, and actually get the shot opportunity itself. Right. And then being a good shot. You don't have to be, a target archer caliber, but you definitely have to practice and reach out to those longer distances. So yeah, I do try to practice a little bit longer and get comfortable in those scenarios.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you just got to make sure you're, as long as you're in the, killing at those distances, you're good. It's like there's not a perfectly placed shot versus a slightly less than perfectly placed shot. As long as the animal goes down and you harvest it, it's the end result is all the same. So I'm kind of the same way. It's like I shoot a good bit. I like shooting, so it's like I'm at the range pretty often. But it's I'm by no means the best archer on the planet either. It's I can get the job done, and that's what I plan to do whenever I hit the woods. It's like I'm not going for style points necessarily. The style points is the bone hanging on the wall, in my opinion.
That's the way I see it, man. I don't care to be the best shot in the world. Yeah, I'm going to try to be, but yeah, like you said, I want to put meat in the freezer. I want to have a successful hunt. I still want to ethically harvest an animal quickly and humanely, and I'm going to practice as often as I can. So been practicing all year. I mean, you can't be one of those guys that just start shooting right before the season opens. It's muscle memory, and especially for a Western hunt, I mean, it's just more physical demanding again. So the more comfortable you can get, the better prepared you are. You're going to be able to make it happen when that stage finally unfolds.
Yeah, it's like I've even taken to, after shooting, I'll jog to pick up my arrows and then come back and knock an arrow right away and try to shoot while my heart rate's up and try to kind of simulate as best you can of being under the intense pressure of, the stress of the walking all day. And then, of course, having a beast of an animal screaming at you from 30 yards away. So,
oh yeah. Anything helps like that for sure. Try to mimic those scenarios as much as possible. It's only going to help you.
Right. So I know I've kept you here for about an hour, and I do appreciate your time, man. So before I let you get going and on with the rest of your evening, I wanted to just see if you could give us take us on a memorable hunt, if you will, and give us every detail from hopping out of the truck to when you're coming back to the tailgate.
Yeah, probably. I mean, if you're more interested in elk, probably have to be the elk hunt I had this last year. It was pretty epic. So we want to go with that one?
Yeah, man. Let's go the elk route. We talk a lot of deer hunting on here, and I'm really wanting to get some elk talk. So let's do that.
Yeah, of course. So I'll try to keep it as short as possible, but there are a lot of kind of details that go into it. But I'll start back with that opening weekend. So I did an opening weekend hunt, and then the following weekend I had planned to hunt with a buddy for a week straight in a different area. So back to opening weekend, I hiked in. My very first elk hunt ever is going to be an overnight by myself, set up camp, and then hunt in the morning. And so I hiked in there. Bugles were just going off. It was crazy. I couldn't believe it. Didn't get a lick of sleep the whole night between the elk bugling and me just being a newbie to that whole scenario by yourself a couple miles in the mountains. I didn't sleep too well. So anyways, woke up in the morning and I was right in them. I basically started from the tent, had a 5x5 come through, and I think he was pressured from another hunter and just kind of moved through. So shortly after that, I always kind of I do this in whitetail hunting. I like to take a practice draw and just make sure everything's good, draw the arrow back, let down. Well, when I drew back, I was halfway let down and my cam snapped on my bow. So that, needless to say, that hunt was over. I packed up camp and headed out of there. And so that hunt was over. That being said, I had the next hunt coming up just in a matter of days. So thankfully I had a backup bow. And so I got that sighted back in. Wasn't going to be able to get my new bow set back up in time in order to go on this next hunt. So I went into it knowing that I'd be using a backup bow. So day one of that first week hunt, we're down in a different area now. Me and a buddy hike all day, didn't see anything. The second day we go in, and on the walk in the morning, we were using this kind of river, rocky riverbed to access a certain area. And I jumped off a log. It was still dark and ended up rolling my ankle. Really, really bad, to the point where I tried walking around on it for about another hour after that in the morning, and just couldn't do it anymore. I needed to get off it. So my buddy continued hunting, and I left back, headed back to camp. And on the way back, unbeknownst to me, after I rolled my ankle, I had my bow on my back and was hiking back, and my quiver must have fell off my bow. And so I got all the way back to camp, and with a rolled ankle on the second day, and lost all my arrows in my quiver. I didn't have any broadheads left, and it was just a mess. So at that point, after day two, I was like, oh my God, elk sucks. I was like, this is the hardest thing in the world,
Right.
And super frustrated, whatever. So that next morning, so this is the third day of the hunt, me and my buddy head back into town so I can get an ankle brace and some meds and get it wrapped up, so at least I can kind of hobble around to a certain extent and still be in the game. So I luckily had some backup broadheads that I used to continue the hunt, and some backup arrows, but I lost all 6 arrows and whatnot. So I'm using a backup bow now with backup arrows with broadheads that I didn't want to be using, but really was my only choice at that time. So so day 3, I didn't hunt in the morning. That time was spent recovering and getting bandaged up in town, and came back up later that night and with my other buddy. And I was just like, hey, I don't want to sit at the cabin. I'd like to go hunting still, but let's find a spot that we can easily access and doesn't require a lot of walking. Meaning I'm gonna hunt pretty much next to the road, right? Which is kind of what you hear opposite. You're never gonna see anything. There's gonna be other hunters there, and you're just wasting your time. So that's really what I thought going into it. But I was like, hey, at least I'm out here, right? There's always a chance.
So we saying there's a chance.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Whether the cards be stacked against you, there's always that chance. So we hiked up in, took about, we probably hiked for about 10, 15 minutes. Mine was more of a hobble / kind of limp walk. But we basically set up over this meadow, right? So we wanted to see if anything came out into that meadow, we would see it. And so we sat there for a couple hours, and you kind of get that magic, last half hour, and I catch movement out in the meadow. And at first I thought it was one cow and one spike bull, but after I got the antlers up, or the binoculars up, I was able to tell that they were both bulls. I still thought it was a spike, and the other one I was like, oh man, that could be a legal bull. The area where I hunt, you have to have 4 points or more on one side in order to legally in order to be a legal bull.
Okay.
So anyways, I stalk in on it, and I credit my kind of Western whitetail hunting experience to being able to stalk in on these elk. And I ended up getting to within 40 yards. This is about as far as I could get where they were out in this meadow. I picked the bigger one, drew back, shot, and drilled it right behind the shoulder. And at that moment, I was like, oh, holy cow, I made it happen. This is gonna be the most epic story ever to overcome these odds and actually get a shot at an elk. And so I thought I hit it great. The only thing I was concerned about was the penetration. I'd only got about 10 inches or so what I thought buried in that elk. So anyways, we wait a couple hours, come back, start tracking him, and find good bubbly lung blood. And I'm like, oh yeah, dead elk. It's only a matter of time. Long story short, we tracked him about 4 hours that night till he bedded down. We found a bed, found my arrow, and basically confirmed it was a single lung hit. And so we backed out that night, came back the next morning. This is now day 4. And searched for another 4 hours until we couldn't search anymore. The blood dried up and there was no elk at the end of it. Wow. So needless to say, after 4 days of hard hunting and finally getting a shot and then not recovering that animal was devastating. It was wow, this could have been awesome, but it wasn't meant to be, right? So we hunted that night and didn't see a thing in a different area. And then the last day of the hunt, we went back to where we hunted on the first day in the morning and didn't see anything. And I said, if we don't get into any elk here by noon, we're hiking out of here and we're going to that other spot where I shot that elk, 2 days before. And so that's what we did. We didn't see anything, went back up to that same meadow. Me and my buddy, we basically split up into 2 spots. So we went up into the top corner. He sat on one side, I sat on the other, trying to put on an ambush scenario of where we thought these elk would come out based on what we'd seen 2 days prior from the bull that I'd killed and didn't find, or shot and didn't find. So last half hour of the hunt again, last night, last part of the day, we're set up and I hear some sticks break in the top part of the meadow, and I look over and there's 2 cows right there. And I'd done some cow calling prior to that. I don't know if they heard that or not, but anyways, they came at a beeline right straight towards my tree, and I was just kind of tucked under a small spruce tree as a little made a makeshift ground blind to kind of cover my area. And literally they came right to my tree, and they got so close to me that I think they smelled where I went in on the ground. I think they smelled my boot tracks. They were still upwind, but they knew something wasn't right and kind of spooked, right? And ran out in front of me and stopped at about 25 yards. So I was like, well, I've got an either sex tag. It's the last night of the hunt. I'll gladly shoot a cow.
Right.
And so I began to start getting prepared to draw my bow back, and I hear some crashing over to my right, and I look up and there's just this giant bull. I mean, giant to me, I guess, right. Coming right out of the timber where these cows had come out of, following that same exact path. And I saw him step out, and my it's tough to explain, but he was a really big bull, and he ended up being a 6x7. But anyways, nice. He comes, does the same thing, and comes to 3 yards. I'm on the ground. I'm basically looking this thing in the eye, or I'm eye level with this thing on the ground at 3 yards. And it's the craziest experience of my life. And he does the same thing. He kind of got boogered up and spooked. And when he slowed up at about the same spot those cows did, I'd already been drawn back, and I let an arrow go, and I buried that thing, double lunged him at 25 yards. At this point, I couldn't believe what happened. It all happened so fast. This what I was telling you, that between the cows and this bull took place over the course of maybe a minute and a half, 2 minutes.
Right.
So it's really quick. So I shot him. He ran out of the field. My buddy saw the whole thing go down, and I knew I'd put a good hit on him, and found my arrow. It was covered in blood, and walked over. And we were just like, well, hey, we still got daylight left. Let's give him a little time. And I was like, well, let's just follow him down to this little trail, and if we don't find any more blood, or hey, we should probably back out if we get to that certain point. But anyways, we got down there, and he was laying in this little creek bottom, and it was pretty amazing to walk up on that bull, and big 6x7 public land over the counter, using a backup bow with backup arrows, with a rolled ankle, with all these things that were in shooting one and not finding one, and then shooting this bull of this caliber. It was just so surreal, and it was just the hunt of a lifetime. If I had to, picture what a perfect Rocky Mountain elk hunt would be, this would be it. And so yeah, shot him, found him, and he ended up scoring 312. Nice. As a 6x7, a really, really nice bull, and it's all downhill for me.
Right.
I never shoot a bigger one than that ever again, but
right.
It was just an awesome hunt. And again, we were so close to the road because of my ankle. I was hunting in that area that we drug him out whole.
Oh, wow. And I was just going to ask you, I was like, with your boogered up ankle, how'd you get him out of there?
Yeah, so I was hunting with one buddy, called my other buddy and a friend, and they came up there and met us, and we cut some poles and hooked up ropes to his antlers and drug that thing out whole to my truck. That's about crazy. A half mile. But it was all downhill. So it was all downhill through a meadow, and that's another crazy part of the thing. I mean, nobody drags out an elk whole, especially on a elk hunt on public over the counter, tags. So it was just, the whole hunt was just crazy. And, I'm so thankful to be able to experience that. And and really that hunt is what I dreamed of moving out to Colorado for. This is what I moved to the state and to do, and to have that happen in my first year of elk hunting was pretty amazing. So that's my story. Sorry that was a little long-winded, but I kind of wanted to tell all the details to kind of give everybody the full picture.
No, man, that was awesome, dude. I mean, the full details kind of make it, man. It's it's the classic story of perseverance. You know what I mean? It's you keep kind of grinding. It's what hunting is, you know what I mean? Yeah. It's especially when you get out in the western states, public land, which is obviously a big hot button topic, especially for outdoorsmen and stuff like that right now, that that's the kind of experiences that you can only get in those types of places. So no, man, I'm happy for you, man. That's a great story, but I don't want to keep you much longer, man. I do appreciate you hanging out with me and talking deer and elk hunting. But before I let you go, let folks at home know of some places they can go to find out more information about you or follow you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Definitely check out my website. It's transitionwild.com. And really, I started that website and blog as part of my experience moving from the Midwest as a whitetail hunter to more of a big game Western hunter. So a lot of the articles I write and a lot of the content I produce is more geared to Western hunting, but I try to kind of show the similarities and differences of Midwest to hunting the mountains. So check me out there. transitionwild.com. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, so you can find me there as well. And let me know what you think. And always, everyone's always welcome to contact me, shoot me an email, or comment on a post. I'd love to hear from you.
Nice, yeah. Man, you're a good follow. It's like I do enjoy the content you put out. It's authentic, it's real, it's humble. Which I think is. How the direction the outdoor industry should move in terms of the media and so forth. So it's always, your posts are always very thoughtful, and I definitely appreciate your perspective. So, but thanks for coming on, man. I won't eat up any more of your time, and here's to a good September, and I'm sure we'll be in touch before then.
Sounds great, Clint. Thanks for having me on, man. Really appreciate it.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I want to thank Adam for joining us, and be sure to check out his blog, Transition Wild, at transitionwild.com, and give him a follow on Facebook and Instagram. I'll put those links, of course, in the blog post show notes. Also, I want to thank all of you for tuning in and giving me an hour plus of your day. Be sure to hit that iTunes subscribe button so you don't miss an episode of the podcast. We've got more great guests coming up the next few weeks that you won't want to miss. Also, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star iTunes rating. We'd very much appreciate your review. And if you'd like to get involved in the show and have us answer any questions, or if you would like to recommend a topic for discussion, email me your suggestions at truthfromthestand@gmail.com, or click the email button on our Instagram or Facebook account. And finally, I need to give a big shout out to our partners that continue to help us make this podcast possible: Whitetail Institute of North America, Exodus Outdoor Gear, and Lone Wolf Portable Tree Stands. And until next time, we'll see y'all.